So let's summon ourselves some outcast Eldar scouts and talk about what Rangers can do in the new Eldar Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Craftworlds once more, and we're going to focus in on the Eldar Rangers, who I'd argue are perhaps the strongest Eldar Craftworld troops choice for competitive lists right now. I do admit that that's probably not the hardest title to get away with. The strength of the Craftworlders doesn't really seem to be in the troops choice, just about every other battlefield role slot seems stronger to me. But seeing as you are going to want some troops, I think Rangers really do fit the bill nicely, and I guess it doesn't really hurt that Rangers have a very nice new plastic kit. It is nice to see them out of resin. In this video we'll talk about the Rangers datasheet, go over their expected damage output, any obvious buffs and synergy for them, and how I feel that they stack up against the other choices in game. Jumping straight into it then, the Eldar Rangers are a troops choice for the Craftworlds, 13 points per model, and you can have between 5 and 10 models in the squad. In general, I think just about everyone's going to be fielding them in 5 model squads. They fill more troop slots that way, they can do more screening and actions, and they can still be fairly good at buffing for damage output, say by combining them with Doom. Keywords wise, they're a core infantry unit, and have the Resonator Shard and Outcast rules, which can allow them a few other synergies. For your 13 points, their stat line is fairly fragile. Toughness 3 models with a 5+ save aren't amazing for that cost, but they do get a nice ballistic skill of 2+, making their sniper fire really quite resilient to modifiers. Their durability is a touch better in cover, they get a +1 to their save when they have a camo cloak, but that still only adds up to a toughness 3 model with a 3+ save. With the amount of decent guns with long range and decent AP in 9th edition, they're still going to be relatively easy to remove as it goes. They have the standard Eldar special rules that you'd expect. Strands of Fate can actually be really good with sniper rifles. Punching in an automatic 6 to wound can guarantee you an automatic mortal wound and a regular wound at AP -1 on your target. It's really fairly excellent for finishing off one key target if you do have a squad spare, and they've only got 1 or 2 wounds left on the model. Otherwise, they have battle focus for a bit of move, shoot, move, and they can get multiple bonuses to that through stratagems. And perhaps one of the most useful things of all is advanced positions, setting up anywhere that's greater than 9 inches away from enemies and their deployment zone, so you can basically use relatively cheap ranger squads to lock down the midfield, and hopefully tempt the enemy units into coming out to deal with them, and hopefully exposing them to a counter-attack. Weapons wise, they're armed with a Ranger long rifle, a heavy one shot at 36 inches, strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1, getting a mortal wound on 6s to wound, and can target characters regardless of lookout sir. For the 13 points, I'll be honest, the sniper damage isn't amazing, as we'll see. You're really going to need multiple squads of them to do anything significant, but as I mentioned, there's a reasonable chance of getting a mortal wound or 2 through, and it's very nice to basically automatically guarantee that with Strands of Fate. They also get a shuriken pistol as well, though in general I'd be a lot more tempted to fall back from most combats rather than staying and shooting. Finally, on the datasheet they have the choice of 2 different upgrades. They can take 1 per 5 models if they want to. The first is a wire weave net. When they're charged, you get a 2+ chance to deal D3 mortal wounds and make the enemy unit -2 to charge. This one's a really nice utility one for objective camping, particularly if they're going for ones on the midfield. The D3 mortal wounds could easily pay for itself if your opponent decides to scrub them out in combat, and the -2 to charge could be really key against enemy deep strikers. If their plan is to deep strike close to you and then try and make a long charge, then that could make it almost undoable. I think that one's really nice, to be honest. The other option is the Gloom Field. They get dense cover at greater than 18 inches away, even if they're out in the open. -1 to hit doesn't hurt their survivability, and I believe that would also trigger their Ranger Cloak advantages, so there should be 4+ saves and -1 to hit, even if standing out exposed. Maybe that one seems reasonable enough for an objective camping unit at the back, maybe. Though still, even with the 5-point upgrade, I still don't think it makes them particularly durable. They're still going to die if anything significant shoots at them. It seems that for the most part in competitive lists that I've seen, just fielding them in cheap squads for 65 points seems the way that most people go. A few people seem tempted by the wire weave net, which to be honest I think is a fair enough upgrade. It does a little bit of damage, and also the -2 to charge could be really key if it makes your opponent fail one. I'd personally be more tempted by that than the Gloom Field, though I guess it does depend on what you're using them for. In terms of damage output, here's what you could realistically expect from a 5 model squad if it's standing stationary. You'd expect around about 2 or 3 wounds to something like a guard company commander or a Skitarii marshal, or an average output of 1.7 wounds per squad against a toughness 4 character with a 3+ save, maybe something like a Space Marine captain or librarian. Basically, individual 5-man squads of Rangers just really are going to be quite unreliable at actually killing characters. Certainly doesn't hurt to throw a few pot shots their way. You could get very lucky and roll a bunch of 6s for mortal wounds. But basically, if you reliably want a character dead, you're going to have to throw multiple squads at them. I guess you'd at least have a reasonable chance of killing a 4 wounds toughness 3 character if you used 1 dice of the Strands of Fate to wound. That in combination with the rest of the squad's damage could give you a decent chance of killing them. I guess you could also combine that with other sources of sniper fire, maybe allied Harlequin Death Jesters, or psychic powers like Mind War maybe. But in general, I'd be more tempted to treat sniper fire as a nice extra thing that they do, while they do their more serious business of just wandering around, screening, scoring objectives, and doing actions and things. In general, as I feel like they're a fairly lightly armed utility unit, for the most part you wouldn't want to go too mad on buffs and synergy for them, but there is a fair amount of stuff that could help them out incidentally. They really quite like the Ulthway or Bealtarm rerolls. They've only got a few shots, so rerolling any of them is pretty nice. A Latok kind of expectedly works quite well with them. Cover out in the open is pretty nice. They have their ambush stratagem where you could potentially intercept things, and a Warlord trait that allow you to redeploy Rangers specifically pre-game. Really quite a powerful maneuver on a forward deploying unit and could save you some CP for Phantasm. Otherwise, Iandin's durability boost is actually quite relevant on them. AP-1 or 2 guns are probably the things that they're fearing the most, and you can get various damage buffs out there from far-flung Craftworlds, rerolls combined with other things. Otherwise, theoretically you could get Ignore's cover from Shroud Runners, but realistically for the Ranger's damage output, I just don't think it's very worth it to justify throwing the squad potentially to its death near an enemy unit, just to get Ignore's cover on a few pot shots. You could also get Autarch rerolls, but I think for the most part Rangers are likely to be wanting to stand on the peripheries of your army as opposed to clustered up in the centre. For Psychic, I think perhaps the single most relevant Psychic power is Doom. If you do have a few squads of Rangers loitering around, then being able to Doom one character could give you a really good chance of offing them with the shooting. Low strength weapons with mortal wounds on 6s or re-rolling wound rolls actually stacks up to a fair amount of mortal wounds expected. Say 3 squads with Doom on their target means that you quite reliably get 3 or 4 mortal wounds out of them, never mind any of the actual damage that their AP-1 guns can do. Obviously though Doom's a really important psychic power, you might well want to be using it on something else. Guide and Fortune I guess could be useful, but in general there's going to be far better targets than that with their ballistic skill 2+ and their fairly flimsy profile to begin with. I guess Will of Azian could potentially be very relevant if you can get it off on them. They're the sort of unit that's really likely to want to be doing actions, so if you can cast that on them, it might well buy them a shooting phase as well. It would be quite nice to have both. Finally, stratagems wise, they can pick up 1 command point for -1 to hit, might be fairly relevant if they're trying desperately to stay alive on a far-flung objective. 2 CP for Phantasm I think could be very relevant, forward deploying them fairly aggressively to do actions and score objectives early, and then pulling them back if your opponent gets first turn and they look like they're going to get wiped out. They've hilariously got 3 different options for basically being able to jump in and out of cover, 2 CP for Fire and Fade, 1 command point for Matchless Agility, and 1 CP for Fire and Reposition. Certainly if you want them to, the Rangers will be able to jump in and out of cover quite reliably, so if you're willing to spend the command points, you could be getting a small amount of sniper fire while also staying safe out of line of sight. Finally, they can make use of their Resonator Shard. That's the option for guiding the Craftworld artillery units. The way that one works is that you nominate a unit within 12 inches of the Rangers, and then D-Cannons, Doom Weavers or Shadow Weavers get to re-roll the hit roll when they're targeting that squad. For 1 command point, that is actually a seriously powerful boost, and as I think those Ignore's line of sight weapons are some of the strongest options in the Eldar arsenal, I think that's an option that could come up just opportunistically from time to time. Quite nice to have the Rangers marking targets for the heavy guns. Finally, I think that secondary objectives are particularly relevant for the Rangers. Setting up in the midfield allows for easy early game actions or getting in table quarters for engage on all fronts. And if you took quite a few Rangers, then they're basically the unit that you want to use for the Scout the Enemy Shadow Operations one. That's the one where you basically repeatedly do an action in the midfield or the enemy DZ. Rangers get to complete the action at the end of your turn, so they've got no chance of being shot dead before they can finish it. Basically, as relatively cheap 5-model OBSEC troops, they're going to be in high demand for doing actions. So overall, how good are Rangers in game at the moment then? As I mentioned, I do feel that they're probably going to be the most taken Craftworld troops at the moment. The competition is a little bit meagre. Storm Guardians and regular Guardians, and then the Corsair Void Reavers, who don't have the most exciting stats and also don't fill detachment slots. Rangers are currently the cheapest troops unit that you can field, at 65 points versus 80 points for the Storm Guardians. The Storm Guardians are generally going to be tougher for the points, but the issue is that they're still not really all that tough, and their damage output is just hilariously bad, only 2 attacks per model with their strength of 3. I feel that maybe the main debate is going to be between Rangers and Guardian Defenders. I think the Guardian Defenders do hit a fair bit harder with their Shuriken catapults, with 1 model per 9 points, but you are having to invest in a big 90-point unit for that, and for a lot of purposes you might just want the cheap 65-point Rangers. They're pretty nice just for sitting around on home field objectives with Auspex quite cheaply. You're not going to miss their firepower too much if they have to do actions for a turn, and the forward deployment gives them just excellent utility for winning the battle as a whole. They can screen out enemy units, do those actions and secondaries early, be just an annoying threat that's put on objectives, and as mentioned I certainly wouldn't discount their sniper damage, just a bit of utility for maybe finishing off injured characters or strands of fate to just kill a hard target with a couple of wounds remaining. They work really nicely with Phantasm as well, pulling them back if they're threatened too early, and potentially even throwing them into strategic reserve if it makes more sense. They're certainly not without their weaknesses though, fragile at range and even more so at melee. The damage output is low. I definitely consider them a unit that you want to maybe have a few squads of for the utility purposes, but then not go mad on, as they're not going to be your main damage dealers. I guess it depends on how many troops you're needing to use for your detachments. If you're looking for minimum investment, then Rangers are great. Maybe a unit or two of Guardian Defenders could be quite nice in a supporting role perhaps. In any case, let me know what you think of the Rangers down in the comments below. Have you had any experiences playing with or against them in 9th edition, and how are they faring on the table? As always, I look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. If you have enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. We'll certainly have a fair few more Eldar videos over the next few weeks and months. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel and you'd like to help support, I would just like to mention the Auspex Tactics Patreon page, which is what allows me to keep on making so many videos like this quite so often. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.